He always thought love was a fatal weakness. So, to prove he was the most ruthless boss in the Korean syndicate, Yom Young-Min publicly humiliated and fired the only woman who kept his demons at bay. It was the biggest mistake of his life, because 24 hours later he is bankrupt, forced to his knees on a penthouse floor and staring up at the woman he threw away. Amanda isn't a crying waitress anymore. She is dripping in diamonds, her flawless dark skin glowing under the chandelier, and she is holding the arm of his deadliest rival. "I didn't just pour your tea, Young-Min," she smiles, draining his offshore accounts with a single tap of her tablet. "I memorized your routing numbers." If you want to watch the coldest mafia boss lose absolutely everything and crawl for the beautiful black woman he discarded, hit that like and subscribe button and buckle up, because revenge has never looked this good. The air inside the syndicate boardroom was thick enough to choke on. At the head of the heavy mahogany table sat Yom Young-Min, impeccably tailored, lethally calm, and radiating a terrifying stillness. Around him, the 5 ancient syndicate elders muttered like vultures, questioning his latest territorial disputes, pushing him to prove his iron grip on the city's underworld. Beneath the table, out of sight from the elders, Young-Min's knuckles were bone white. The phantom tremors of a panic attack were clawing up his throat. The pressure of the crown was crushing him alive. Then, the heavy oak doors opened. The temperature in the room instantly shifted. Amanda stepped in. She wore the simple, understated uniform of the VIP lounge, but she moved with a quiet, grounding grace that demanded the air in the room. The subtle, intoxicating scent of cocoa butter and warm jasmine washed over the stale cigar smoke. Young-Min didn't look up, but his chest finally expanded. He took his first real breath in an hour. She approached his side of the table, her presence a silent shield against the vipers in the room. As she leaned in to pour his jasmine tea, the soft, warm curve of her wrist briefly brushed against his icy silver rings. The physical contact was less than a second, but it was an anchor. The tremors in his hands vanished. She was the only peace he had ever known in a life built on blood. The lead elder, a man with eyes like dead coal, stopped speaking. He stared directly at Amanda, then shifted his cruel gaze to Young-Min. "You keep her dangerously close, Young-Min," the elder sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "A boss with a pet is a boss with a leash. The syndicate requires absolute ruthlessness. Attachments are a fatal flaw. Tell me you haven't grown soft." The room went dead silent. The trap was set. To hesitate meant death. To protect her meant showing weakness, and weakness meant a bullet to the back of the head by midnight. Young-Min looked at Amanda. Her deep brown eyes met his, radiating nothing but gentle trust. She believed he would handle it. She loved him enough to be his shadow. To keep his throne, he had to break her. Without a flinch, Young-Min stood up. His arm lashed out like a whip. The deafening crash of shattering porcelain echoed against the stone walls. Boiling tea and jagged ceramic exploded across the floor, splashing against Amanda's legs. She gasped, stumbling back, the silver tray clattering violently to the ground. "Soft?" Young-Min's voice was a terrifying, hollow rasp that didn't even sound human. He looked down at Amanda as if she were dirt on his Italian leather shoes. "She pours my drinks. That is the extent of her existence. You think I care about a clumsy, replaceable waitress?" Amanda froze. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a shock so profound it made her physically sway. "Young-Min," she whispered, her voice cracking, completely oblivious to the elders watching her heart break in real time. "Do not speak to me," he snapped, his tone laced with absolute zero ice. He stepped closer, towering over her, forcing every ounce of his own self-hatred outward. "You are a distraction. You are clumsy. You are insignificant, and you are fired. Get out of my sight before I have my men throw you into the street." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the boardroom. The elders watched, their cruel eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He had passed the test. He was a monster. Amanda didn't scream. She didn't beg. The tears that welled in her eyes never fell. She looked at the shattered teacup, then up at the dead, empty eyes of the man she had loved in secret. She nodded once, a slow, devastating acceptance, and walked out of the heavy oak doors. The moment the doors clicked shut, the warmth vanished from the room. A freezing, terrifying void slammed into Young-Min's chest. He had secured his empire, but he had just ripped out his own soul to do it. He dismissed the elders and walked out into the private hallway feeling like an untouchable god, but breathing like a drowning man. The silence without her was already deafening. Suddenly, the heavy vibration of his encrypted phone broke the quiet. He answered. It was his elite hit squad. "Boss?" The voice on the other end cracked with adrenaline. "The target is on the move early. We need you in the sniper's nest. You have to take the shot tonight." Young-Min ended the call. He reached into his coat for his weapon, but froze. Without Amanda's calming scent, without the memory of her touch to anchor him, his hands were already beginning to violently shake. The icy wind tearing across the rooftop was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the boardroom. But Yom Young-Min was drowning in both. Lying flat against the freezing concrete, he pressed his eye to the scope of his high-powered rifle. Down below, the target stepped out of a limousine. Young-Min reached up to adjust his earpiece, waiting for the familiar, velvety sound of Amanda's voice checking his pulse rate. He waited for the phantom scent of jasmine and cocoa butter to ground him, to slow the frantic beating of his heart. But there was only static. A cold, hollow terror bloomed in his chest. His lungs seized, without her absolute calm to anchor him. The suffocating pressure of his violent life crashed down all at once. The heavy silver rings on his fingers began to rattle against the metal stock of the rifle. He tried to lock his joints, but a violent tremor seized his hands. The crosshairs in his scope danced wildly, bouncing off the target and blurring into a panicked streak of city lights. He was losing control. The apex predator of the underworld was hyperventilating on a roof. Desperate, he pulled the trigger. The deafening crack echoed over the skyline. Concrete exploded an inch from the target's skull. The man dove into the armored car, doors slamming shut before speeding away into the night. Young-Min lowered his head against the cold roof, his chest heaving. He had missed. Instantly, the secure channel in his ear flared to life. The lead elder's voice poured in, dripping with cruel satisfaction. "You missed. Your grip is gone. The title is revoked. Code red on Yom Young-Min. Purge him." His empire vanished in 3 seconds. He was now a dead man walking. Yet, as he abandoned the rifle and stumbled toward the stairwell, He didn't care about the throne or the millions of dollars evaporating from his name. He was suffocating. The panic attack was tearing him apart from the inside. He just needed her. Tires screamed against wet asphalt as he tore through the city, abandoning his security detail. He reached the rundown building where Amanda lived, taking the narrow stairs 3 at a time. The desperate need to see her warm, glowing skin and hear her forgive him pushed him to the brink of madness. He didn't bother with the handle. He kicked the flimsy door straight off its hinges, the wood splintering loudly into the dark room. "Amanda!" His desperate voice echoed against bare walls. The apartment was completely empty. Her clothes, her books, the lingering scent of jasmine, everything was gone. A chilling emptiness hung in the air. He stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of her perfectly made bed, resting alone in the cold shadows, was a single, flawless, dark orchid. The signature calling card of Lachlan Cross. Pure adrenaline pushed Yom Young-Min through the gilded doors of the penthouse. The heavy security detail lay incapacitated in the private elevator lobby behind him. His breath was ragged, his tailored suit torn and stained with violence. He had torn the city apart, fueled by a singular, frantic vision. Finding her locked in a cage, terrified, waiting for him to save her. He violently kicked open the double mahogany doors to the master suite, his weapon drawn and his eyes wild. But the frantic energy in his blood hit a wall of thick, sweet air. The room smelled of expensive oud and freshly poured champagne, not fear. A massive stone fireplace cracked softly, casting a warm, flickering glow across the room. There, sitting gracefully in a plush velvet armchair, was Amanda. She wasn't crying. She wasn't bound. She was draped in an emerald green silk gown that cascaded over the armrest like water. Her flawless, dark melanin skin glowed under the ambient light, adorned with a heavy collar of diamonds that caught the fire's reflection. Her braided hair was pinned up elegantly, framing a face that held absolutely zero fear. She looked regal, untouchable, like a queen who had finally taken her throne. Young-Min lowered his weapon, his mind struggling to process the impossible image. The desperate, consuming need to protect her surged forward, blinding him to the reality of the room. He crossed the distance in seconds, his heavy boots sinking into the thick carpet. He reached down and grabbed her arm. "I'm getting you out of here," he breathed, his voice trembling with exhausted relief. Amanda didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Slowly, she lifted her gaze from the fireplace to his panicked, hollow eyes. Her expression was completely devoid of the gentle warmth he used to rely on. It was terrifyingly calm. She looked down at where his bruised, cut hand gripped her pristine silk sleeve, then looked back up to his face. "Let go, Young-Min," she whispered, her voice a smooth, icy command that froze the blood in his veins. "You're bleeding on my Persian rug." Before Young-Min could process the ice in her voice, the heavy double doors clicked shut behind him. Slow, mocking applause echoed through the master suite. Lachlan Cross stepped into the firelight, casually adjusting the cuffs of his midnight blue velvet tuxedo. He looked infuriatingly relaxed, holding a crystal decanter. "I have to admit, Yom," Lachlan drawled, pouring himself a glass of champagne. "I expected the great syndicate boss to put up more of a fight before breaking into my home. You look like a stray dog." Young-Min's hand tightened on his weapon. He stepped in front of Amanda, instinctively shielding her from the European aristocrat with his battered body. The hostility radiating from him was absolute. "If you think you can use her against me, Cross, you are already a dead man. I will burn your entire empire to ash and scatter it in the harbour before I let you keep her." A rich, dark sound broke the tension. It took Young-Min a second to realise what it was. Amanda was laughing. It wasn't the soft, soothing hum she used to offer him when he was stressed. This was a deep, melodic laugh dripping with pure, undeniable authority. She gently pushed past Young-Min's protective stance, stepping closer to Lachlan. The aristocratic rival didn't flinch. He simply handed her a champagne flute with a respectful bow of his head. Young-Min froze, the weapon feeling suddenly heavy and useless in his grip. The reality of the room was finally snapping into focus. Amanda wasn't a hostage. "Burn his empire?" Amanda asked, taking a delicate sip of her drink. She picked up a sleek silver tablet from the side table. "You don't have the matches, Young-Min. You don't even have a spark." With a single manicured finger, she tapped the screen. A second later, the encrypted phone in Young-Min's torn jacket violently vibrated. Then it chimed again, and again. A rapid, sickening sequence of alerts. He pulled it out, his bruised thumb swiping across the cracked screen. His breath caught in his throat. Every single offshore account, every hidden syndicate ledger, every emergency fund he had built over a decade of bloodshed. 0. The numbers plummeted in real time until there was absolutely nothing left. "I didn't just pour your tea, Young-Min," Amanda smiled, the firelight catching the dangerous flash in her deep brown eyes. She stepped into his space, close enough for him to catch that intoxicating scent of jasmine, but her gaze was terrifyingly foreign. "I memorized your routing numbers." The phone slipped from his numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. He was completely, irrevocably ruined. Lachlan snapped his fingers. 4 massive guards stepped out from the shadows, easily twisting Young-Min's arms behind his back and forcing the penniless, broken king to his knees. The brutal shift in temperature hit him before he even hit the ground. The security guards didn't just escort him out, they hurled him through the heavy service doors into the freezing downpour of a back alley. The opulent warmth of the penthouse and the intoxicating scent of Amanda's perfume were violently erased by the biting wind and the smell of wet asphalt. Young-Min hit the ground hard, the rough concrete tearing the knees of his ruined suit. He was completely stripped. No empire, no money, and worst of all, no Amanda. He staggered to his feet, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his chest heaving as the reality of his new existence set in. Then, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The primal instinct that had kept him alive for a decade flared to life. A shadow detached itself from the brick wall, blending seamlessly with the dark. The silence. The syndicate's elite executioner, the elders hadn't wasted a single minute. There was no grand speech, just the sharp, metallic scrape of a blade drawn in the dark. Young-Min dodged the first strike on pure muscle memory, the knife slicing through the heavy fabric of his trench coat. The rain made the ground incredibly slick, turning the fight into a desperate, feral struggle for survival. He blocked a lethal thrust aimed at his throat, feeling the jarring impact rattle his bones, but his bruised hands were slow. Much too slow. The assassin spun, stepping inside Young-Min's guard, and drove the blade deep into his ribs. A blinding flash of agony stole his breath. He gasped, instantly tasting the metallic tang of his own blood. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, Young-Min twisted, driving his elbow into the assassin's jaw with a sickening crack. The executioner staggered, loosening his grip on the knife just enough for Young-Min to break away. He stumbled blindly toward the busy avenue, clutching his side. Warm blood poured over his fingers, mixing rapidly with the freezing rain. Through the downpour, the headlights of a yellow taxi slowed for a red light at the intersection. Young-Min lunged, tearing the back door open and collapsing into the worn leather seat. "Drive," he choked out, his vision swimming. The driver slammed on the gas, tearing off into the neon-lit blur of the city. As the freezing chill of shock began to set in, Young-Min slumped against the window. The harsh streetlights faded, replaced by a feverish, desperate hallucination. In the darkness of the cab, he felt the phantom weight of warm hands pressing gently against his bleeding chest. The faint, sweet smell of cocoa butter filled the stale air, and for a fleeting moment, he wasn't dying alone. 24 hours later, the underground auction beneath the city was a sea of velvet and greed. Amanda moved through the crowded ballroom like absolute royalty. She was draped in a liquid gold silk gown that contrasted breathtakingly with her flawless dark skin. A $10 million diamond choker rested at her throat, catching the ambient light and the breathless stares of every man in the room. Across the room, gripping a silver tray of champagne flutes, was Yom Young-Min. He wore the crisp, anonymous white shirt and dark vest of a banquet waiter. Beneath the stiff fabric, heavy bandages wrapped tightly around his torn ribs. Every breath was agonizing, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing humiliation. 2 days ago, he was an untouchable king discarding a clumsy waitress. Now, he was an invisible servant, bleeding out and risking his life just to breathe the same air as the woman who bankrupted him. He watched Lachlan step away to negotiate with a European art dealer. Seizing the brief window, Young-Min slipped through the wealthy crowd, tracking Amanda as she retreated into the dim, quiet seclusion of the VIP coat check. The moment she was alone among the endless rows of cashmere and fur, he stepped out from the shadows. Amanda turned sharply, her hand flying to the diamonds at her throat. Young-Min looked devastating. His face was pale, exhaustion carving deep shadows under his cheekbones. He dropped the silver tray. It hit the thick carpet with a dull thud, abandoning his disguise entirely. He closed the distance between them, desperate to reach out, but forced his shaking hands to remain at his sides. "Amanda," he rasped, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "Please, I was a fool. Run with me right now. I will build the empire back from nothing, just for you." Amanda stared at his ruined state, her dark eyes flashing with an unreadable emotion. She opened her mouth to reply, but a deafening metallic slam echoed through the confined space. The heavy deadbolt on the only door slid into place with a terrifying, final click. Young-Min froze, the blood draining from his face. The air in the room grew instantly cold. He recognized the slow, deliberate scrape of a boot against the floorboards on the other side of the wood. The syndicate assassin hadn't lost his trail. They were completely locked in. The heavy wooden door didn't just rattle. It exploded inward. Splinters of thick mahogany flew through the dim coat check as the first volley of silenced gunfire tore through the room. Acting entirely on instinct, Young-Min threw his body over Amanda, tackling her into the dense rows of heavy cashmere and mink. They crashed to the floor, buried beneath the weight of the coats. Above them, bullets shredded the fabric, sending down a slow rain of expensive feathers and torn silk. Trapped in the suffocating darkness, Young-Min's breathing grew dangerously erratic. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth from his torn ribs, but the claustrophobia and the immediate threat to Amanda's life shattered his remaining control. A violent panic attack seized his chest. He was hyperventilating, his pale, trembling hands completely unable to hold his weapon steady. Amanda felt the violent shaking of his frame against hers. She looked up. In the dim light filtering through the bullet holes in the door, she saw the broken, terrified boy hiding beneath the ruthless monster he pretended to be. The icy anger inside her wavered, replaced by a devastating, instinctual pull. Slowly, she raised her hand. Her warm palm pressed firmly against his cold, pale jaw. The shift was instantaneous. The rich, sweet scent of cocoa butter and jasmine cut straight through the smell of gunpowder. The moment her skin met his, the violent tremors racking Young-Min's body ceased. His heart rate slowed, his frantic breathing steadying into a deep, ragged rhythm. Staring down into her deep brown eyes, a profound, agonizing realization washed over him. He hadn't just lost a waitress. He had discarded his entire world, the only genuine peace he had ever known in his violent existence. "The service hatch," Amanda whispered, pulling her hand away and pointing toward a grated iron vent hidden behind the farthest rack of furs. Driven by a desperate need to keep her safe, Young-Min forced himself up. Ignoring the blinding agony in his ribs, he kicked the iron grate free just as the assassin's heavy boots stepped over the threshold of the room. He pushed Amanda through the narrow duct, crawling right behind her until they tumbled out into the freezing, damp air of the back alley. Young-Min leaned against the wet brick wall, coughing but smiling softly. They had made it out alive. The adrenaline and the lingering ghost of her touch made him foolishly hope that this shared survival had bridged the gap between them. He looked up, ready to beg for a second chance. A blinding sweep of halogen headlights cut him off. 3 armoured luxury SUVs idled at the mouth of the alley. Lachlan's motorcade. A guard stepped out, holding the rear door open. Amanda dusted a stray feather from her gold silk dress and adjusted her diamond choker. She offered Young-Min one final, unreadable glance, stepped into the warm interior of the vehicle, and closed the door, leaving him completely alone in the dark. The damp walls of the safe house offered no comfort, only a suffocating silence that amplified the ringing in Young-Min's ears. He sat alone in the center of the dilapidated room, ignoring the throbbing pain in his stitched ribs. The only light came from the harsh glare of 3 stolen laptops resting on a rusted folding table. Driven by a raw, agonizing obsession, he had bypassed the city's encrypted security networks. He wasn't tracking the syndicate assassins hunting him. He was tracking her. On the center screen, live surveillance footage played from a lavish European estate. Amanda was there. She looked breathtaking in a sweeping crimson gown, her flawless dark skin glowing beneath the crystal chandeliers. Young-Min leaned closer to the monitor, his breath shallow. He watched the way her elegant braided hair rested over her shoulder, desperately craving the familiar sweet scent of cocoa butter that he knew accompanied it. Then, Lachlan Cross walked into the frame. The aristocrat placed a possessive hand on the small of Amanda's back. Young-Min's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ground together. A sickening, feral jealousy clawed at his throat as Amanda offered Lachlan a polite, reserved smile. It was a smile Young-Min used to ignore when it belonged to him, but seeing it directed at his deadliest rival felt like swallowing broken glass. He had thrown away his only piece, and now he was forced to watch another man build an empire on his mistake. The feed abruptly switched from the silent security camera to a live, high-society news broadcast. The reporter's voice echoed through the empty safe house, announcing a historic merger between two global dynasties. The camera zoomed in on the center of the ballroom. The music stopped. The wealthy crowd parted. Lachlan took Amanda's hand. He didn't just kiss her knuckles. He dropped to one knee right in the middle of the marble floor. A collective gasp rippled through the broadcast as Lachlan pulled out a velvet box, revealing a diamond the size of a crushed star. He was proposing. He was claiming her permanently in front of the entire underworld. A blinding, reckless fury finally snapped the last thread of Young-Min's restraint. With a raw, furious yell, he drove his bare fist straight through the center monitor. Glass and sparks exploded across the table, plunging the room into darkness. But he didn't feel the cuts on his knuckles. He stood up, the physical pain in his ribs completely eclipsed by a lethal, singular purpose. He moved to the heavy duffel bag in the corner of the room, pulling out the last of his weaponry. The syndicate wanted him dead, and Lachlan wanted his queen. They were all going to burn. He slammed a full magazine into his rifle, the metallic click echoing in the dark. He was crashing the engagement party. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom stood unguarded. Inside, a string quartet played a sweeping waltz, masking the sharp, metallic click of Young-Min chambering around. He moved silently through the shadows of the mezzanine balcony, his eyes locked on the center of the polished marble floor. Lachlan Cross stood there under a massive crystal chandelier, raising a glass to toast his new engagement. Amanda stood rigidly beside him, a breathtaking vision in crimson silk. Young-Min raised his rifle. His finger brushed the trigger. He was going to end the aristocratic rival right in front of the city's elite. But before he could exhale, the towering glass windows along the eastern wall violently shattered inward. A deafening barrage of automatic gunfire tore through the ballroom. The string quartet's elegant melody warped into a chaotic shriek of wood and wire as musicians and wealthy guests screamed, diving for cover. Young-Min dropped to a knee, narrowly dodging a spray of bullets that shredded the heavy velvet curtains beside him. He looked down through the raining glass and thick smoke. It wasn't Lachlan's security returning fire. It was the syndicate. Dozens of armed men in grey suits flooded the room, flanked by the cruel, dead-eyed lead elder. They hadn't just come to finish the execution order on Young-Min. They had waited for Lachlan to gather his entire hierarchy in one vulnerable room so they could slaughter them all and claim the European territory. A brutal, three-way war instantly erupted. Young-Min abandoned his vantage point, vaulting over the balcony railing and dropping to the marble floor below. He ignored the burning agony in his stitched ribs and the crossfire tearing the room apart. He didn't care about the elders or the throne he had lost. His eyes frantically scanned the terrifying chaos, tracking the bright crimson fabric of Amanda's dress through the dense, blinding smoke. He spotted her near the shattered remnants of the Champagne Tower. Young-Min surged forward, firing his weapon to clear a path, desperate to throw himself between her and the flying bullets. But his blood ran cold, and his boots skidded to a halt. Lachlan wasn't shielding her. Instead of pulling Amanda to safety, the aristocrat forcefully grabbed her by the arm, violently jerking her backward. Lachlan wrapped a thick forearm around her throat, pulling a heavy silver pistol from his tuxedo jacket and pressing the barrel directly against her temple. He was using his fiancée as a human shield. Amanda gasped, her hands flying up to claw at his restricting grip, her elegant crown of braids coming undone. A cruel, mocking laugh rumbled from Lachlan's chest, loud enough for Young-Min to hear over the gunfire. "Did you really think I loved you?" Lachlan sneered, his charming facade dissolving into pure, predatory greed. "You are nothing but a beautiful key, Amanda. A key to your family's Nigerian oil money. And now, I don't have to share the throne." The cruel laughter hadn't even faded from Lachlan's lips before he made his move. Seeing the syndicate gunmen turning their weapons toward the center of the room, the aristocratic coward shoved Amanda violently forward. He pushed her directly into the devastating line of fire, using the momentum to dive behind a shattered marble pillar for his own survival. Time seemed to fracture, slowing to a terrifying suspended crawl. Amanda stumbled, the heavy crimson silk of her gown tangling around her legs. She looked up, seeing the bright, lethal flashes of the syndicate rifles illuminating the thick smoke. There was nowhere to run. From across the ruined floor, Young-Min didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds or consider the fallen empire he was leaving behind. He moved on pure, raw instinct. He threw his rifle aside and sprinted through the crossfire, launching himself across the slick marble right as the deafening crack of gunfire erupted. He collided with Amanda, wrapping his arms tightly around her shoulders and violently twisting his body to shield her entirely from the onslaught. 2 rounds tore straight into his chest. The impact was catastrophic. Young-Min's momentum carried them both to the floor, his heavy frame crashing down with Amanda safely secured beneath him. For Amanda, the chaotic roar of the ballroom instantly muted into a ringing, suffocating silence. The overwhelming smell of sulfur and gunpowder burned her lungs, but it was immediately eclipsed by the sharp, terrifying scent of fresh blood pouring onto her hands. She scrambled up to her knees, her fingers frantically pressing against his ruined chest. Young-Min lay on the cracked marble, his breathing a shallow, wet rasp. His pale skin was rapidly losing color, but as his dark eyes locked onto her face, his tense features completely relaxed. A soft, genuine smile broke through the immense pain. He reached up with a trembling, blood-stained hand, his fingers gently brushing a loose braid behind her ear. He didn't speak a single word. He didn't need to. In his fading gaze, there was only absolute devotion and the quiet relief that she was unharmed. He had finally proven that his love wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing he was willing to die for. A heavy, suffocating shadow fell over them. Amanda slowly looked up. The ringing in her ears faded, replaced by the chilling, synchronized sound of a dozen rifles cocking at once. The syndicate had formed a tight circle around them. Standing at the head of the execution squad was the lead elder, his dead, cruel eyes staring down at the fallen boss. The elder didn't even acknowledge Young-Min's sacrifice. He raised his weapon, pointing the barrel directly at Amanda's forehead. "Kill the girl too," the elder ordered. The click of the rifle echoed loudly in the ruined ballroom. Amanda looked up at the circle of syndicate executioners, her hands still pressed against Young-Min's bleeding chest. The lead elder sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. He expected her to scream. He expected her to beg. But the crushing weight of Amanda's grief instantly hardened into absolute, terrifying ice. She looked down at the pale, broken man who had just sacrificed his life for hers. Carefully, tenderly, she laid Young-Min's head against the cracked marble, her blood-stained fingers smoothing the dark hair from his forehead one last time. Then she stood up. She didn't brush the glass from her torn crimson gown. She didn't cower from the dozen gun barrels pointed directly at her face. The quiet, gentle waitress was gone. The regal, devastating authority she had kept hidden for years radiated from her with such sudden, overwhelming force that two of the syndicate gunmen instinctively took a step back. Ignoring the elder entirely, Amanda reached into the hidden pocket of her silk dress. She pulled out a heavy, encrypted satellite phone. A cruel, mocking laugh tore from the lead elder's throat. "Who are you calling, little bird? The police? There is no one left in this city to save you." Amanda didn't look at him. She bypassed the standard networks, her thumb pressing a single red button. The secure line connected instantly. "Otito," she spoke into the receiver, her voice carrying a calm, lethal command that commanded the very air in the room. "It is enough. Come get me." She let the phone slip from her fingers, letting it clatter uselessly against the floorboards. The elder scoffed, shaking his head at the display. He raised his handgun, aiming dead center at her forehead. "Pathetic," he spat, preparing to pull the trigger and end her life. He never got the chance. A low, terrifying hum vibrated through the soles of their shoes. The heavy vibration rapidly escalated into a deafening, rhythmic roar that drowned out the sirens wailing in the distance. The polished marble floor began to violently tremble. Above them, the massive crystal chandeliers swung wildly, the remaining bulbs exploding from the sheer, crushing atmospheric pressure. The elder looked up, his cruel eyes widening in sudden, unadulterated panic. Before any of the syndicate men could raise their weapons toward the ceiling, the massive, vaulted glass roof of the ballroom completely collapsed inward, raining a hurricane of razor-sharp shards as absolute destruction descended from the sky. The deafening roar of the rotors completely swallowed the chaos in the ballroom. Through the gaping, jagged hole in the ceiling, 5 heavily armored tactical helicopters hovered against the night sky, their blinding spotlights cutting through the thick smoke like blades of solid light. Before the syndicate gunmen could even raise their rifles toward the sky, thick climbing ropes dropped into the wreckage. Descending from the choppers were not the police. They were Amanda's bloodline. Her 3 older brothers landed on the ruined marble floor with earth-shattering precision. They were billionaire warlords from Lagos, and they moved like absolute royalty. Dressed in perfectly tailored dark tactical suits over crisp designer shirts, they carried custom, gold-plated weaponry that gleamed under the harsh helicopter lights. The lead elder yelled a frantic command in Korean, but the word barely left his throat. The retaliation was a masterpiece of flawless, overwhelming violence. Amanda's brothers and their elite guard annihilated the syndicate forces in less than 90 seconds. It wasn't a firefight, it was an extermination. The cold, precise barrage swept through the room, dropping the gunmen before they could pull a single trigger. The ancient, terrifying Korean mafia that had ruled the city for decades was dismantled and completely erased before the dust even hit the floor. Amanda didn't flinch at the deafening noise. She stood perfectly still beside Young-Min's unconscious, bleeding body. Her posture was impossibly straight, her chin held high as she watched her family clear the room. Through the dissipating smoke and the groans of the dying, a sudden movement caught the corner of her eye. Lachlan Cross, the arrogant European aristocrat who had just tried to use her as a human shield, was desperately crawling across the slick floor. His pristine white tuxedo jacket was ruined, his smug demeanor replaced by pathetic, whimpering terror as he tried to drag himself toward the grand exit. A heavy tactical boot slammed down onto Lachlan's spine, pinning him flat against the cracked marble. Amanda's oldest brother stood over the trembling rival boss. He looked down at the European aristocrat with complete, unbothered disgust. Slowly, he unholstered his gold-plated handgun and pressed the hot muzzle directly against the back of Lachlan's head. The room fell into a sudden, terrifying silence, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades above. Her brother lifted his gaze, his dark, commanding eyes locking onto Amanda across the ruined ballroom. He offered her a warm, familiar smile that completely contrasted with the lethal weapon in his hand. "Do we kill the roach, little sister?" Amanda walked slowly across the ruined floor, the heavy silk of her torn crimson gown sweeping over the shattered glass. She stopped right in front of her oldest brother, looking down at the European aristocrat trembling beneath his heavy combat boot. Lachlan Cross, the man who had promised to conquer the city just an hour ago, was actively sobbing. "Kill him?" Amanda repeated her brother's question, her voice beautifully calm. "No. Death is too cheap for a man who tries to steal a crown." Her brother chuckled, a rich, deep sound that echoed over the hum of the helicopters outside. He shifted his weight, pressing his heel just a fraction harder into Lachlan's spine. "Hear that, European? My sister says you're not worth the bullet." Another brother, standing casually near a destroyed champagne tower, tossed a sleek, digital tablet across the room. Amanda caught it effortlessly. She crouched down, ignoring the blood staining her dress, and placed the glowing screen inches from Lachlan's tear-streaked face. "This is a total asset transfer," Amanda explained, her tone as casual as if she were ordering coffee. "Every shipping lane, every offshore account, and every property your cartel owns. It now belongs to me." Lachlan gasped, choking on the thick smoke. "You can't do this. My family will—" "Your family will answer to me by morning," she interrupted softly. She grabbed Lachlan's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, and forced his trembling thumb onto the biometric scanner of the tablet. A sharp, cheerful chime pierced the heavy tension in the room. Approved. In less than 10 seconds, a centuries-old European dynasty was completely liquidated. Lachlan collapsed against the cracked marble, stripped of everything, weeping into his ruined white tuxedo. Amanda stood up, handing the tablet back to her brother. The ultimate revenge was complete. The cartel was hers. But the quiet triumph was instantly shattered. Her oldest brother stepped off Lachlan's back. He didn't put his gold-plated weapon away. Instead, the terrifying warlord turned slowly, his heavy boots crunching over the debris, and walked toward the center of the room. He stopped in front of Yom Young-Min. Young-Min was barely conscious, bleeding heavily onto the floor, his breathing shallow and ragged. He didn't even have the strength to lift his head to face the man standing over him. The heavy metallic click of a hammer being pulled back echoed sharply. Her brother aimed the barrel directly at Young-Min's chest. The playful mockery vanished from his eyes entirely, replaced by a deadly, protective fury. "The roach is dealt with," her brother said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal rumble. He looked over his shoulder at Amanda, waiting for the command. "Now, what do we do about the Korean boy who broke your heart?" The silence in the ruined ballroom felt heavier than the concrete dust settling in the air. Amanda stepped forward, the torn silk of her crimson gown brushing softly against the cracked marble. She looked down past the barrel of the gun to the man who had once ruled the city with terrifying coldness, now bleeding out at her feet. Young-Min forced his heavy eyelids open. His vision was swimming, blurring the edges of the destruction around them, but Amanda was perfectly in focus. She looked devastating, regal, and entirely untouchable. He didn't try to crawl away. He didn't beg for mercy. The arrogant king who had discarded her to impress a room full of dead men was completely gone, leaving only a broken boy staring at his true north. A weak, bloody smile touched his pale lips. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice a ragged, breathless rasp. He shifted his fading dark eyes to the towering Nigerian warlord holding the gun. "Do it. Shoot me. I threw away my entire world." The brother's jaw tightened. His finger began to squeeze the trigger. Amanda reached out, her warm, dark hand wrapped gently around her brother's wrist, physically pushing the heavy weapon down toward the floor. "No," she commanded, her voice soft but echoing with absolute, unquestionable authority. "He is mine to deal with." She turned her gaze to the elite tactical medic standing by the shattered windows. "Stabilize him. Put him on the first flight to Lagos. If his heart stops before I am finished with him, I will hold you responsible." The darkness immediately pulled Young-Min under, dragging him away from the ruin of his empire and into a deep, dreamless void. For days, he floated in a feverish haze of surgical lights, the hum of an airplane engine, and the terrifying silence of his own failing heart. But every time the darkness threatened to pull him under completely, he felt the phantom warmth of Amanda's hand, anchoring him to the waking world. When absolute clarity finally returned, there was no smell of sulfur, gunpowder, or copper blood. He took a slow, deep breath. The air was warm and rich, carrying the sweet, intoxicating scent of jasmine perfectly mixed with the crisp tang of ocean salt. He slowly opened his eyes. He wasn't in a sterile underground hospital or a damp syndicate safe house. He was lying in a massive, sun-drenched bed wrapped in pristine white linen. The bright, golden African sun poured through open floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a luxurious, sprawling room he had never seen before. A gentle ocean breeze rustled the sheer curtains. He looked down at his chest. His torso was meticulously bandaged, the agonizing, life-threatening bullet wounds reduced to a manageable ache alongside his healing ribs. He tried to push himself up to secure the perimeter, but his muscles were completely drained of strength. He fell back against the soft pillows, his breath catching in his throat as the staggering reality finally set in. The lethal Korean Mafia Boss had been flawlessly healed, but trapped in this beautiful, sunlit cage, he was entirely, irrevocably powerless. For the first time in his life, Yom Young-Min was completely at the mercy of another. He swung his bare legs over the edge of the plush mattress, the cool marble floor a sharp contrast to the feverish heat he had endured for days. His bandaged chest ached with a dull throb, but the paralyzing weakness was finally gone. He pushed the heavy carved ebony doors of his room open, stepping out into the sprawling, sunlit corridors of the Lagos estate. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and distant sea salt. He followed the quiet murmur of voices until he reached a massive set of double doors left slightly ajar. Inside, the room was a breathtaking display of modern power. Sunlight poured through expansive glass walls, catching the rich, golden undertones of Amanda's skin. She sat behind a massive desk carved from solid wood, reviewing digital manifests and effortlessly commanding an empire that stretched across continents. She wore a tailored white silk suit that contrasted beautifully with her dark, flawless complexion, her braided hair pinned up in an elegant crown. She was no longer a waitress serving drinks in the shadows. She was the absolute ruler of the underworld. As Young-Min stepped into the room, she looked up, her deep brown eyes locked onto his, silencing the room. With a simple gesture, she dismissed the guards and advisors, leaving the two of them entirely alone in the quiet expanse of the office. He walked slowly toward her. Every step was a surrender. He bypassed the plush visitor chairs placed in front of her desk, moving directly to her side. The ruthless Korean boss, a man who had once demanded the city bow to his every whim, didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. He dropped straight to his knees beside her chair. Amanda looked down at him, her expression a mixture of quiet strength and lingering tenderness. Young-Min reached up, his trembling fingers gently taking her warm hand. He brought her palm to his face, pressing it firmly against his pale cheek. He closed his eyes, finally breathing in the sweet, intoxicating scent of cocoa butter that had anchored him through the darkest moments of his violent life. The heavy, suffocating weight of his past shattered entirely, replaced by an overwhelming, permanent peace. He looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with a raw, pure devotion that he no longer needed to hide from the world. "I used to rule a city," Young-Min whispered, his voice thick with unshakable conviction. "But I was born to serve a queen.